2 days before my flight to London, I opened my document folder for the 4th time that night and realized my passport was gone. Not misplaced. Not buried under receipts. Not tucked into another compartment. Gone. I remember the exact feeling that hit me first. It wasn't panic yet. It was disbelief. That strange, cold pause when your brain rejects what your eyes are showing it. My fingers kept moving even after I understood the truth. I checked the same pocket twice. Then again. Then I emptied the folder onto my bed with shaking hands, like maybe one more scan would force reality to correct itself. Flight confirmation. Printed itinerary. Interview schedule. Housing information. Fellowship acceptance packet. A sealed envelope with copies of my transcripts. No passport. I dropped to my knees and pulled open my desk drawer hard enough for it to slam against the stopper. Pens, chargers, notebooks, a passport-size photo envelope, old receipts, a stress ball from some campus event. I yanked open the second drawer. Then the third. I tore through my backpack. Dumped every pocket. Checked under my mattress. Stripped my bed. I even opened the laundry hamper like a complete idiot, as if an official federal document had somehow folded itself inside a pair of jeans. My heartbeat got so loud it felt physical, like something knocking from the inside of my ribs. That passport was not just an ID. It was my exit. My proof. My future. Without it, I didn't make my international fellowship interview. Without that interview, I lost the biggest opportunity of my life. A full-year global leadership fellowship. Paid housing. Paid travel. Direct mentorship. Policy placement opportunities. The kind of opening that changes not just your career, but the people you get to become around. I had worked for that shot for years. And the second I realized the passport was gone, I knew exactly who had taken it. I looked up toward my doorway. My older brother Lucas was leaning against the frame like he had wandered there by accident. One shoulder pressed to the wood. Arms folded. Ankles crossed. He had that loose, lazy half-smile he always wore when he wanted to look casual while enjoying somebody else's pain. He was 28, broad-shouldered, still carrying the remains of the athlete body our parents never stopped worshipping. Even standing still, he somehow managed to look smug. Like the room belonged to him. Like my panic was entertainment. He didn't ask what was wrong. He didn't offer help. He just looked at the papers all over my floor and said, "Lose something?" That was Lucas. He never needed a confession. He preferred theater. I stared at him long enough to let him know I understood exactly what he was doing. Then I said, very quietly, "Give it back." His smile widened a fraction. "I don't know what you're talking about." Of course he didn't. He never knew what I was talking about when my science project got smashed the night before judging in 7th grade. He never knew what I was talking about when the final draft of my scholarship essay vanished from my laptop junior year. He never knew what I was talking about when cash disappeared from my wallet, when acceptance letters arrived already opened, when passwords stopped working, when teachers emailed asking why I had submitted the wrong attachment, when my car keys turned up in the freezer once, like my life was some long-running prank everybody else got to laugh about. And every single time, my parents had the same response. "Lucas wouldn't do that. You're overreacting. You always assume the worst. Why do you make everything into a war?" So I didn't waste words on him. I walked past him and went downstairs. My mother was at the kitchen island with her iPad propped up against the fruit bowl, scrolling through some neighborhood committee email with a mug of tea beside her. She didn't look up when I came in. That alone told me she already knew something was wrong. In our house, the silence was never neutral. It was coordinated. "Mom," I said, trying very hard to keep my voice level, "have you seen my passport?" She sighed the way people sigh when a child interrupts adult business. Then she lifted her eyes slowly, not with surprise, but with preloaded pity. Didn't you put it in your folder? It was in my folder. Well, if it was in your folder, she said, then maybe you should retrace your steps before accusing people. I hadn't accused anyone. Not yet. I'm not accusing anyone. I'm asking if you've seen it. She gave me the kind of smile that only looks gentle from far away. Up close it was condescension in soft packaging. Drake, you've been stressed for weeks. You've barely slept. You keep acting like this interview is life or death. Maybe you moved it and forgot. That phrase again. Maybe you moved it. Maybe you forgot. Maybe reality is not what you think it is. That was her favorite form of control. She never needed to call me crazy. She just needed to speak to me like I was slightly unreliable, slightly emotional, slightly less stable than everyone else in the room. If she did it long enough, other people joined in. Then suddenly I wasn't defending facts. I was defending my tone. Before I could answer, my father called from the living room. Drake. Come in here. That voice meant one thing. It wasn't a conversation. It was sentencing. He was in his recliner with a glass of bourbon in his hand, the television muted, one ankle crossed over his knee like he was preparing to deliver a business assessment instead of listen to his son. My mother came in behind me and took the end of the sofa. Lucas drifted in last and stayed standing near the doorway, which told me everything. They had already arranged the stage. My passport wasn't missing. My future was being negotiated. I stood there and said, I need help finding my passport. My flight is in 2 days. My father looked at me for a long second before speaking. Maybe, he said, this is a sign. A sign. I can still hear how calm he sounded. Calm is often the cruelest tone because it lets the other person feel dramatic for bleeding. A sign of what? I asked. That maybe this whole thing is too much for you. I laughed once, because if I didn't, I was going to start shouting. He continued like he was explaining market conditions to an intern. You've built this trip into some kind of all-or-nothing fantasy. London. International fellowship. Big stage interview. A lot of pressure. A lot of travel. A lot of expectations. Maybe some opportunities just aren't meant for everyone. My mother folded her hands in her lap and gave a tiny nod, as if he had said something wise. Lucas looked at the floor to hide how pleased he was. My father took a sip of bourbon and went on. You need to be realistic about your capabilities. Realistic. That word had followed me my whole life like a leash. When Lucas dropped out for the 3rd time, he was still finding his direction. When Lucas blew through his savings, he was learning hard lessons. When Lucas punched a hole in the garage drywall after losing a game, he was under a lot of pressure. But when I won something, earned something, built something, or wanted something bigger than the boundaries of our zip code, suddenly I needed to be realistic. I looked at all 3 of them and understood the shape of the moment with brutal clarity. This was not about my passport. This was about hierarchy. Lucas had spent his whole life being the center of the family story. The natural talent. The athlete. The son with presence. The son strangers noticed. The son my mother bragged about. The son my father defended. The son every room was arranged around. I had always been useful only when I was quiet, accomplished enough to make them look good, but never accomplished enough to threaten the balance. And now I had done something dangerous. I had earned a future they could not filter through Lucas first. The Global Leadership Fellowship wasn't local. It wasn't one more campus achievement they could mention at a dinner and then pivot away from. It was international, visible, prestigious. It came with money, travel, contacts, and the possibility that I might build a life no one in that house could diminish. That made me a problem. My mother leaned forward slightly. Honey, maybe you should take a breath and think about what really matters. I almost smiled at that, because I knew exactly what came next. Family, she said. Stability. Loyalty. Not chasing every shiny thing that comes along. Every shiny thing. I had spent 6 years building toward that fellowship. Lucas cleared his throat and finally joined in. You make everything so dramatic. If one document going missing destroys the whole plan, maybe the plan wasn't strong to begin with. There it was. The smirk with a sentence attached. My father nodded. Your brother is trying to help you see this rationally. I looked at Lucas. There are moments in a family when something hidden becomes permanent. Not newly true. Just impossible to pretend you haven't seen it anymore. That was one of those moments. I saw, with complete certainty, that if I collapsed right there, if I missed that interview, if I lost that fellowship, the three of them would go to sleep that night believing they had restored order. My mother would call it unfortunate. My father would call it a lesson. Lucas would call it funny. And not one of them would ever admit what they had done. So I did the only thing they would never expect. I lowered my eyes. I let my shoulders drop. And I said, maybe you're right. The room changed instantly. I watched relief pass between them like a signal. My mother softened first. We just don't want to see you hurt. My father exhaled through his nose and leaned back deeper into the chair. Lucas shifted his weight, disappointed the show had ended so quickly, but satisfied with the result. I nodded once, turned around, and went back upstairs. I heard Lucas laugh softly behind me. When my bedroom door shut, my face went flat. Not broken. Not confused. Flat. I crossed the room, locked the door, sat on the edge of my bed, and listened to the house settle around me. The television came back on downstairs. Cabinet doors opened and closed in the kitchen. Somebody laughed. Not loud. Just enough. Comfort had been restored. That was when I pulled out my phone and texted Ryan. It's tonight. He answered in less than 10 seconds. Then we go. I stared at those words until my hands stopped shaking. Ryan had been my best friend since sophomore year of college, one of the only people who had ever looked at my family and seen the truth without me having to explain it 3 different ways. He'd met Lucas once, watched him interrupt me 3 times in 15 minutes, and later said, "Your brother doesn't compete with people. He feeds on them." He was right. But the truth is, I had understood that about Lucas much earlier. I just didn't have the language for it when I was younger. When we were kids, Lucas didn't bully me in obvious ways that adults could condemn. He specialized in ruin that looked accidental. He borrowed things and returned them late. He forgot deadlines. He moved objects half an inch off where I had left them so I would question my memory. He volunteered to help, then sabotaged the help. He mocked me just quietly enough that if I reacted, I looked sensitive. And my parents never asked what pattern I was living inside. They only judged my reaction to the latest incident. The worst part wasn't the sabotage. It was the training. Year after year, I was trained to recover quietly. I was trained to clean up damage while smiling. I was trained to doubt evidence if it made Lucas look bad. I was trained to feel guilty for wanting accountability. I remember the science fair project because that was the first time I understood my pain could be converted into his comfort. I had spent 3 weeks building a working mechanical bridge model with load-bearing joints and a pulley demonstration. I loved that stupid project. I stayed up late reading beginner engineering forums and watching grainy videos so I could make the tension balance properly. The night before judging, Lucas came into the garage, bumped the table, and sent the entire thing crashing to the floor. The sound it made still lives in me. Wood cracking. Glue joints snapping. My own breath catching. He said, "I tripped." I said, "You did that on purpose." My father came out, looked at the mess, looked at Lucas, and said, "He said he tripped." Then he turned to me and added, "Stop making everything malicious." I rebuilt what I could until 2 in the morning. My hands were shaking so badly I glued 2 sections backward. I didn't place. The lesson wasn't that my project got ruined. The lesson was that in our house, Lucas's intent mattered less than his comfort, and my pain mattered less than my reaction. By junior year of high school, I had stopped leaving anything important unattended. Or at least I thought I had. I was applying for a regional leadership scholarship and had written the best essay of my life, something raw and careful about civic trust in young people growing up inside systems they don't get to choose. I had the final draft saved on my laptop. Lucas asked to use it to print practice schedules because his printer was acting up. An hour later, the file was gone. Not in trash. Not recoverable. Gone. My mother's response wasn't anger at him. It was a lecture at me about backing up documents. My father said setbacks build resilience. Lucas shrugged and said computers glitch. I rewrote the essay from memory with maybe 40% of the original force. I didn't get the scholarship. There were dozens of moments like that. None of them dramatic enough for a movie. All of them small enough to deny. Together they formed a life. So when the email came from the fellowship program saying I had made it to the final international round in London, I didn't celebrate at home. I sat in my car in a grocery store parking lot and read the email 6 times. Then I cried. Not loud. Not beautifully. Just that ugly, silent crying people do when they've been holding themselves together for too long and suddenly something good slips past the guards. I knew what the fellowship meant. I also knew what my family would hear if I told them. They would hear absence. Distance. Autonomy. Proof that I did not need their permission to become somebody. So instead of going home and sharing the news, I drove to the passport office the next morning. I told them I needed a replacement because my original had been misplaced. That was not technically true then. It was true in spirit. I paid the expedited fee myself. I rented a P.O. box on the other side of town so nothing important came to the house. I opened a cloud folder under an email account no one knew I had. I scanned every acceptance document, every ID, every transcript, every itinerary. I changed passwords. I moved money. I stopped leaving papers in visible places unless I wanted them seen. The fake itinerary came later. That part still makes me proud. I knew Lucas monitored what I printed. He treated visible information like prey. So I printed a clean copy of a later flight than the one I was actually taking and left it inside a folder in my desk, where I was almost certain he would eventually go looking. If he stole the passport attached to that visible plan, he would think he had crippled the trip. What he didn't know was that my real replacement passport was sitting in a safe deposit box at a bank managed by Ryan's uncle, sealed in an envelope with backup copies of everything else. I wish I could say I felt smart doing all that. Mostly I felt sad. There is something deeply lonely about preparing escape routes from the people who are supposed to be your first safe place. It changes the taste of ordinary life. Dinner stops feeling like dinner. It becomes surveillance. Hallways become routes. Questions become probes. Smiles become weather reports. You stop relaxing in your own home because your home has taught you not to. And still, I kept the secret. I finished final prep. I answered my mother's questions vaguely. I let my father assume I was managing expectations. I let Lucas think he could still read me. Then, 2 days before the flight, the visible passport disappeared exactly as I had known it would. The only part one hadn't predicted was how calm I would feel once the performance downstairs ended. Maybe because certainty is cleaner than hope. Hope keeps asking whether you're wrong about people. Certainty lets you move. About 20 minutes after I texted Ryan, there was a soft knock at my door. My mother came in carrying a mug of chamomile tea. I knew before she spoke that this was for her, not for me. She needed one final scene in which she played the concerned mother and I played the disappointed son being guided gently back into smaller dreams. She set the mug on my nightstand and sat beside me. The chamomile smell hit the air, sweet and warm and nauseating. "Drake," she said softly, "I know this hurts right now." I kept my eyes on the carpet. But maybe this is a blessing in disguise. London is far. It's expensive. It's intense. You've always been prone to overextending yourself. Prone to overextending. That was her way of describing ambition when it belonged to me. When it belonged to Lucas, it was drive. She touched my shoulder. "You don't have to prove anything to anyone. You can stay here. Regroup. Find something local. Help your father more. Build a stable path." Stable. Another family word. Stable meant close enough to monitor. Stable meant small enough to absorb. Stable meant no one in the neighborhood would have to ask why one son was leaving while the other remained stalled in place. I let my chin dip and whispered, "Maybe this is for the best." She squeezed my shoulder once, satisfied. "That's a very mature way to see it." Mature. Meaning obedient. She stood, told me to get some sleep, and left. The second the door clicked shut, I got up, opened my laptop, and checked every detail. Real boarding pass, confirmed. Passport location, secure. Hotel confirmation, downloaded offline. Emergency contact, changed. Family removed from every document that allowed a change. Ryan, ready. Chloe, ready. Cash, separated into 2 envelopes. Old phone backup, packed. Then I sat on the floor and waited for midnight. I didn't sleep. I listened. That house had a different sound at night depending on whether peace was real or manufactured. Real peace had softness to it. Manufactured peace had a kind of smug quiet, like the walls themselves were satisfied. At 1:17 a.m. I heard Lucas stomp down the hall, use the bathroom, and go back to bed. At 2:40 I heard my father cough. At 3:05 the dishwasher hummed its cycle out in the kitchen. At 3:49 the house settled into that heavy pre-dawn stillness where every noise feels enlarged. At 4:12 I stood up. I was already dressed. Dark jeans, hoodie, sneakers. I pulled my duffel bag from beneath the bed and did one last check by phone flashlight. Passport? No. Safe at the bank. Wallet. Backup cash. Charger. Folder. Suit. Toiletries. Printed copies. I slung the bag over my shoulder and opened my bedroom door. No creak. 2 weeks earlier I had oiled the hinges in silence with WD-40 while everyone was watching television downstairs. Not because I was paranoid. Because I had learned to translate fear into preparation. I moved into the hallway. The family photos on the wall caught moonlight through the high window near the stairs. Every frame told the same lie in a different outfit. Lucas in the center. Lucas with trophies. Lucas in uniform. Lucas grinning. My parents glowing beside him. Me somewhere near the edge, smiling the way children smile when they can already feel they are not the point. I passed them all without slowing down. At the top of the stairs, I stepped over the loose board I had memorized at 12. Third stair from the bottom, left edge only. The living room opened ahead of me in dark shapes. Recliner. Lamp. Coffee table. The kitchen beyond it. The back door beyond that. I reached the deadbolt and turned it slowly enough to feel every click in my fingertips. The door opened. Cold air rushed in. For a second, standing on that back step in the dark, I felt something almost impossible. Not fear. Lightness. Then the motion sensor over the garage snapped on and flooded the driveway in white light. I froze. A window above me shot upward. Drake? Lucas. Even half asleep, his voice carried suspicion like instinct. I didn't look up. I didn't explain. I didn't hesitate. I ran. Not elegantly. Not heroically. I just ran like a person who had finally understood that stopping to negotiate with captors only teaches them how long you'll stand there. I hit the driveway, cut across the lawn, nearly slipped on wet grass, and sprinted toward the street with my duffel bag slamming against my hip. Behind me I heard Lucas shout my name again, louder now. A second later the front door of the house flew open and my father's voice joined his. Then my mother, sharp and confused, asking what was happening. What was happening was simple. The person they had spent years trying to shrink was leaving faster than their story could catch him. 2 houses down, a pickup truck sat in the dark with its lights off. Ryan shoved the passenger door open from inside before I even reached it. I threw myself in and shouted, "Go." He didn't ask for details. He didn't ask if I was sure. He just hit the gas. The truck lurched forward, tires spitting against pavement, and the house started falling away behind us. I twisted in my seat long enough to see them. My father on the front walk in pajama pants, one hand braced against the rail. My mother at the doorway clutching her robe closed with both fists. Lucas in the driveway, staring after us with an expression I will never forget. Not anger. Not yet. Confusion. The pure confusion of someone who had always believed the script belonged to him. My phone started vibrating before we reached the end of the block. Mom calling. Dad calling. Lucas calling. Then again. And again. Ryan glanced over. "You want me to answer?" "No." I stared at the screen until it went dark, then I powered the phone off completely. The neighborhood slid past in long shadows. Houses I had known all my life. Mailboxes. Trimmed lawns. The basketball hoop in the Wilsons' driveway. The corner where Lucas once shoved me off my bike and convinced everyone I had swerved into him. The coffee shop where I used to sit for hours pretending to study because it was easier than going home. Ryan drove fast but steady. Neither of us spoke for several minutes. Finally he said, "You okay?" It was a stupid question and exactly the right one. I looked out at the windshield, at the empty road opening ahead of us, and said, "I think so." Not because I felt okay. Because I felt gone. There's a difference. About 15 minutes later, we turned into a nearly empty Walmart parking lot on the edge of town. A dark gray Porsche waited near the far end under a flickering light. That was Chloe. Ryan's older sister. Corporate lawyer. Knife-sharp mind. Zero tolerance for bullies. The kind of woman who could make men twice her age sound foolish with one sentence and then drive away before they recovered. The truck pulled up beside her SUV. I jumped out, grabbed my bag, hugged Ryan hard enough to feel the bones in his shoulders, and got into Chloe's passenger seat. She handed me a coffee without asking how I took it. "Black." "Phone off?" she asked. "Yes." "Good." Then she pulled out of the lot and drove toward O'Hare like she had someplace more important to do than rescue someone from their own family, which somehow made the rescue feel even safer. As the city slowly woke around us, I kept waiting for the next disaster. A police stop. A blocked card. A phone call from the airline. Something. Nothing came. That's one of the strangest things about leaving a controlling environment. You expect the world to be full of traps because the world inside that environment always was. Then you step outside and find out roads are just roads. Airports are just airports. Doors are just doors. Most people are too busy living their own lives to patrol your right to have one. Chloe dropped me at Terminal 5 a little after dawn. I thanked her and reached for the handle. She stopped me with one sentence. "Don't confuse guilt with love." Then she nodded toward the terminal. "Go become expensive." I laughed for the first time in hours. Inside, the airport was bright, loud, and gloriously indifferent. Families arguing over baggage weight. Business travelers power-walking with coffee cups. Children dragging blankets. Screens flickering with departure times. Nobody looked at me like I was difficult. Nobody looked at me like I needed to be managed. I was just one more passenger in motion. At the check-in counter, I felt my pulse spike for the first time since leaving the house. Not because I thought my paperwork was wrong. Because trauma doesn't leave when you do. It rides in your muscles a while. I got through bag drop. Then security. Then passport control. The agent took the replacement passport, scanned it, looked at me, stamped what needed stamping, and handed it back with a board, "You're all set." That was it. No sirens. No confrontation. No dramatic revelation. Just permission. I walked away holding the passport so tightly my knuckles went white. By the time I reached my gate, the sun had started lifting over the glass edge of the terminal. I sat down, powered my phone back on for exactly 2 minutes, and watched the screen explode. Missed calls. Voicemails. Texts stacked on top of texts. Where are you? Call me immediately. You are making a huge mistake. How dare you do this to your mother? If you leave like this, don't expect us to fix anything for you. Then Lucas. You think this is funny? Come home before Dad locks everything down. You're not built for this anyway. That last line almost made me smile. Because it was the purest version of the family religion. You're not built for this. Not success. Not distance. Not freedom. Not visibility. Not a bigger room. Stay in scale with our fear. I took a photo of my boarding pass with the barcode covered and sent it to Ryan with 2 words. Through TSA. Then I blocked all 3 of them. Not as revenge. As oxygen. When boarding began, I stood, adjusted my duffel bag, and walked down the jet bridge without looking back once. The flight itself was a blur of exhaustion, adrenaline collapse, and that strange emotional numbness that follows survival. I dozed in fragments. Woke up with my jaw clenched. Stared out the window at cloud cover and tried not to imagine what was happening back home. At one point I took the fellowship packet from my bag and reread the program schedule just to anchor myself in something larger than the escape. Arrival in London felt like stepping into a life that had existed without my permission for years and was only now opening its door. Grey sky. Rain on the windows. Announcements in soft, overlapping accents. Lines moving efficiently. Rolling luggage over polished floors. Nothing in that airport knew who my family thought I was. At arrivals, a woman holding a tablet with my name introduced herself as Sarah Whitmore, one of the senior mentors with the fellowship. She shook my hand like I was someone worth meeting. That alone nearly wrecked me. On the drive into the city she asked me about my policy interests, my research focus, what I hoped to learn from the program, and whether I'd ever been to Europe before. She did not ask if I was sure I could handle it. She did not ask if my family approved. She did not tilt her voice into concern every time my future got bigger than comfortable. That absence felt so foreign I almost didn't know how to receive it. The fellowship house was beautiful. Old architecture, dark wood, narrow staircases, windows that made the whole building glow in the afternoon rain. People from all over the world moved through its common rooms with that particular combination of brilliance and exhaustion that comes from caring hard about things bigger than yourself. Housing reform. Public health. Youth policy. Education access. Climate mobility. Nobody apologized for having a mind. Nobody reduced themselves so the room could stay simple. I put my bag in my room, changed into a suit, and walked into orientation feeling like a man who had escaped a fire and somehow arrived in a library. Everything accelerated from there. The sessions were intense. Panels, discussions, case interviews, rapid turn policy prompts. But for the first time in my life, pressure did not feel like punishment. It felt like invitation. On the second afternoon, the program director asked a few finalists to speak briefly on the hidden barriers shaping our generation's ability to lead. My name was called. I stood, walked to the front, and looked out at a room full of people who had never once seen me as the lesser son of a house built around somebody else. Something in me unlocked. I spoke about invisible ceilings inside ordinary lives. Not just money. Not just access. The smaller, uglier ceilings. The ones installed by families, schools, communities, and cultural expectations that tell certain people they may be competent, but never too visible, talented, but never inconveniently ambitious, impressive, but only if their success doesn't embarrass the fragile people around them. Then one of the advisors asked, "What is the hardest barrier to explain to people who haven't lived it?" And I answered without planning the sentence first. "The hardest barrier is the one that smiles while it limits you," I said. "The barrier that calls itself love. The barrier that says it's protecting you when it's really protecting its own comfort. The barrier inside your own home that keeps asking you to become smaller and calls that maturity." The room went completely still. Not uncomfortable. Listening. The good kind of stillness. The kind that means you have spoken from somewhere honest enough that other people found themselves in it. Afterward, several people came up to talk. Not with pity. With recognition. A student from Toronto said, "That sounded lived." A woman from Nairobi nodded and said, "Some families fear your growth because it reveals their compromise." Sarah found me later near the staircase and said, "You stop editing yourself when you speak. Keep doing that." I think that was the moment I finally understood the scale of what my family had been trying to prevent. Not just the trip. Not just the interview. They had been trying to stop me from entering rooms where I would be accurately seen. Back in Chicago, the silence I had imposed by blocking them didn't create peace. It created panic. Ryan kept me informed because at that point my old life was collapsing in ways too dramatic to ignore. The first crack came from Lucas's own arrogance. He had apparently bragged in a group chat to a few old teammates that he had handled my trip by hiding my passport and forcing me to miss the visible plan. He thought it was funny. He thought it made him look powerful. He thought other men would admire the move. Instead, one of them screenshotted the messages. That screenshot made its way, through two more people and one very motivated older sister, to a local journalist named Claire Donnelly who did human interest reporting with a taste for quiet corruption in polished neighborhoods. She reached out asking if I would be willing to speak about family interference in educational opportunity. I hesitated. Not because I was protecting them anymore. Because I understood something important about truth. If you tell it sloppily, people focus on the mess. If you tell it cleanly, people are forced to face the structure. So I agreed on one condition. I would not rant. I would not speculate. I would speak only to what happened, what pattern preceded it, and why it mattered. The interview aired 2 nights later. I was in London when it happened, sitting in a common room after dinner, trying to pretend my stomach wasn't folding in on itself. Ryan called as soon as it ended. He was laughing so hard I could barely understand him. "They had the news on," he said. "They were all there." I closed my eyes and could see it perfectly. My father in the recliner. My mother upright on the sofa. Lucas probably pacing. The television a harmless background presence right up until it wasn't. Then Claire's voice. A suburban family. A rising fellowship finalist. Allegations of repeated domestic sabotage. A missing passport. A leaked message thread. A son speaking from London in a navy suit, calm and unreachable. Ryan said my father lunged for the remote. My mother started getting texts before he could even switch the channel. And Lucas, for maybe the first time in his life, got to watch the room stop believing him in real time. The segment wasn't sensational. That was why it hurt them so badly. Claire framed it around family systems, educational opportunity, and the damage done when private favoritism becomes active obstruction. My interview clip was maybe 40 seconds total. In it I said, "I'm not interested in humiliating anyone. I'm interested in telling the truth about what happens when one child's future becomes negotiable inside a family that has already decided who matters more." That line spread. Not because it was flashy. Because it named something too many people recognized. By the next morning, the story had escaped television and moved into the bloodstream of the town. Facebook groups. Parent circles. Neighborhood texts. School networks. Church whispers. All the little channels suburban respectability uses to protect itself had reversed direction and started carrying the truth instead. My mother did what people like her always do when control fails privately. She tried public softness. She posted a long message about how proud she was of my accomplishments, how families experience stress, how misunderstandings get amplified, how grace and privacy matter in difficult seasons. It might have worked if she had not spent years letting everyone watch her orbit Lucas like a personal moon. Her own sister commented first. "Stop lying. We all saw how you treated him." Then a neighbor. "If you were proud, why did nobody hear about the fellowship until it was on the news?" Then another. "I remember him studying at the coffee shop for hours. Maybe ask why he never wanted to be home." She deleted the post. Too late. Screenshots live longer than dignity. The next blow landed on Lucas. He had been in informal talks with a state university program still considering him for athletics. Not because he was extraordinary anymore, but because former promise can drag itself surprisingly far when adults keep making excuses for the man carrying it. Once the screenshot surfaced, those conversations froze. Then they stopped. A coach called him in and said the program was reevaluating character concerns. I heard later that Lucas tried 3 different versions of the same defense. It was a joke. The media twisted it. My brother is unstable. That last one was almost poetic. When all else failed, he ran back to the oldest family script and found out strangers were not willing to perform it with him. My mother lost her leadership role in the district volunteer committee. Quietly. Respectfully. Completely. My father stepped down from a community fundraising board after being informed that his presence had become a distraction. That phrase made me laugh. A distraction. For years my dreams had been called distractions. Now they were the ones interfering with the smooth functioning of the image they had built. And still, none of them apologized. That was the part that finally cured me of waiting. They called from unknown numbers. They sent blocked messages. They tried email. You've made your point. The family is hurting. We all made mistakes. Please come home so we can handle this privately. But never. We were wrong. Never. He stole from you. Never. We protected him at your expense. Never. You deserved better. The fellowship ended with a closing event in a chandelier-lit hall full of donors, diplomats, advisors, and finalists wearing the kind of ambition that doesn't need permission anymore. I had been chosen to give the final youth address. Before I went on stage, Sarah looked at my printed remarks and tapped the last paragraph. "Do not soften that part," she said. So I didn't. I stood at the podium and spoke about hidden ceilings, inherited silence, and the way fear gets passed through families disguised as wisdom. I spoke about the violence of being told to become smaller so others can remain comfortable. I spoke about what it costs to outgrow the story written for you by people who need your limitation to feel secure. And near the end I said, some people will call it love when they delay you, dismiss you, diminish you, or decide that your future should remain no larger than their fear. It is not disloyal to survive those limits. It is not arrogance to protect your own potential. Sometimes the most honest thing you can do is leave the room where your becoming has always been treated like a threat. When I finished, the room stood. Not all at once. In waves. That mattered to me more than if it had been instant, because waves mean people are rising out of recognition, not reflex. 6 months later I was in Geneva, standing in another airport with snow visible beyond the windows and a new contract in my bag. The fellowship had turned into something larger: international youth policy work, ambassador responsibilities, travel, speaking engagements, a salary my family would once have called unrealistic until it became too real to deny. London led to Geneva. Geneva led to Boston. Boston led to Toronto. And in every new room I entered, I felt the same strange quiet truth settling deeper into me. They cannot reach me here. Not geographically. Narratively. That was the real freedom. One afternoon during a layover, I found an email from my mother in my spam folder. No subject line. Just 4 sentences about how hard the year had been, how empty the house felt, how families are imperfect, and how she hoped one day I would remember they had only ever wanted what they thought was best. Even then she couldn't do it. Even then she was still fighting for custody of the version of events in which their control was care and my escape was overreaction. I read the email once. Then I deleted it. No shaking hands. No rehearsed reply. No late-night spiral. Just delete. That was the moment I understood something I wish I had known much younger. Freedom is often very quiet. It is not always a slammed door or a public confrontation or a final speech that leaves everyone stunned. Sometimes freedom is a Tuesday afternoon in transit when the message that once would have hijacked your entire nervous system now barely interrupts your breathing. Sometimes freedom is realizing their voice still exists, but it no longer outranks your reality. The biggest surprise after all of it was not the peace. It was the space. Once I stopped waiting for them to admit what they had done, enormous space opened inside my life. Space for work. Space for travel. Space for relationships that didn't require me to shrink before entering the room. Space for ambition without apology. Space for rest. And into that space came other people. Students. Young professionals. Sons and daughters and siblings and scholarship finalists and people sitting in parked cars reading acceptance emails they were afraid to take home. They wrote to me because the story had spread far beyond that town. Some had hidden financial aid letters. Some had parents who sabotaged applications. Some had brothers handed businesses and inheritance while daughters became unpaid emotional labor. Some had learned, like I had, that the family role assigned to them was not loved child or difficult child, but designated absorber of everybody else's insecurity. I answered as many messages as I could. Not with slogans. With tactics. Scan your documents. Separate your money. Do not share passwords. Assume people who benefit from your dependence will resist your independence. Pay attention when someone calls your ambition selfish. A lot of the time, selfish is just the word controlling people use when your growth stops serving their comfort. Build your exit before you announce it. Never mistake surveillance for care. And if a person keeps asking you to become smaller for peace, understand that what they actually want is easier access to you, not a better life for you. That became the real victory. Not that Lucas lost what he thought was guaranteed. Not that my parents became social outcasts in the circles they valued. Those were consequences. Real ones. Deserved ones. But still consequences. The victory was that they failed. They failed to convert my doubt into destiny. They failed to make their version of me permanent. They failed to keep me in a house where every success had to pass through the approval of people who were threatened by it. And maybe most important of all, they failed to make me believe that love and reduction were the same thing. They weren't. They never were. Love does not hide your passport. Love does not smirk while you panic. Love does not call sabotage realism. Love does not soothe you into surrender while secretly celebrating your collapse. Love does not keep one child large by teaching another child to disappear. That is not love. That is control with family photos around it. A journalist asked me once, much later, whether I believed success was the best revenge. I told her no. Success is not revenge. Success is expansion. Revenge still keeps the wound at the center. What I built after leaving was not designed to hurt them. It was designed to outgrow the reach of people who had mistaken access for ownership. Their humiliation came because the truth finally reached public light. My peace came because I stopped needing them to understand it. That difference changed everything. Sometimes I still think about that night in flashes. The empty folder on the bed. Lucas in the doorway. My mother with the chamomile tea. My father saying some opportunities aren't meant for everyone. The deadbolt turning in the dark. The motion light exploding over the driveway. Ryan's truck. The airport stamp. The plane lifting over Chicago as morning broke across the wing. At the time, all of it felt like terror. Looking back, I can see it for what it really was. Birth. Messy. Painful. Necessary. Because the truth is, my brother did steal my passport 2 days before the most important interview of my life. He did it because he thought my future was something he was allowed to touch. My parents helped because they thought my future was something they were allowed to scale down until it fit their idea of family order. And I left. That is the simplest version of the story. I left before they could close their hands around the rest of my life. I left before their doubt hardened into my identity. I left before one more year in that house taught me to call survival gratitude. And once I left, everything they had built on secrecy started falling apart under the weight of daylight. So if you want to know what I did after my brother stole my passport days before my international fellowship interview, the answer is this. I let him think he had one. I let all of them think I was finally defeated. Then I took the future they had spent years trying to shrink, carried it out through the back door before sunrise, and built a life so far beyond their reach that the only thing they can do now is look at what I became and realize they were never strong enough to stop it.